On the air and streaming on the web since 1996, this is the Cinematic Sound Radio Network. This is Talking Soundtracks with Jason Drury on the Cinematic Sound Radio Network.
Hello again, my name is Jason Drury and welcome once again to Talking Soundtracks on the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. My guest today has scored music for over 30 feature films, multiple TV series, video games, as well as a full-length ballet for the Finnish National Opera. His name is Panu Aaltio. Best known for his emotional work on major nature documentaries, Panu's melodic orchestral sound has also graced dramatic scores such as FURBALL Saves the Future, as well as Finders of a Lost Yacht, a swashbuckling adventure that takes place on the Baltic Sea. Another of his recent projects is 5,000 Blankets, released in the US at the end of 2022, which follows the story of a woman and her young son who set out to find her husband when he goes missing after having a mental breakdown, which sparks a movement in their city. At the end of January 2023, for Talking Soundtracks on the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast, I had the pleasure to talk to Panu Aaltio. During the interview, we talked about his music for film and television, his award-winning music for nature documentaries, and his hopes for his future career, as well as talking initially about his wonderful score for 5,000 Blankets. Panu Aaltio, welcome to Talking Soundtracks.
Hey, thank you.
Now, first of all, tell us about your latest project, 5,000 Blankets.
Yeah, that was actually a really interesting project in how it came about, because director Ami Matalka had actually heard my music on a podcast. That was really cool. And we kind of kept in touch because that was already in 2016. So it's been a while. And now it's just like the perfect project sort of came along where we could work together. So that already for that reason, that was really cool, because I know Ami is such a lover of film music. So I always wanted to work for him. I really loved the sort of heart that the movie had immediately from the first time I watched it. I knew we could do some really nice music in there because it has a very human story. I mean, it's a very musical director. There's a lot of room for the music to do things. So I could really develop like themes, very elaborate themes and very melodic themes. So very cool project.
Were there any directions from the director or producers as to how they wanted the film scored?
I think we just kind of started sort of finding the tone of the movie. So I started doing these sort of theme tests and sketches. And once Amin sort of picked which one he liked the most, that kind of already gave us a good sort of direction, because I was trying out also different sort of emotions and tones with those themes. So it was just not variations of the same kind of melody, but they were very different, some very somber ones. And this was more about the sort of the family happiness that we kind of picked on. Or I mean, definitely like picked that one very quickly. Like he liked that one. Then I kind of took that and started orchestrating it through the movie. Of course, we had spotted the movie, so we kind of knew where we wanted the music, and I mean, so I had very sort of good thoughts about how to sort of pace the score and movie. So then I kind of started applying the themes with that idea. And yeah, I think combined with how Amin had already thought of what the music in the movie and with those themes, I was kind of able to kind of just run through the movie and make sort of the first draft. And then we started doing some improvements based on, there were some scenes where he had some ideas on how to develop them further. But yeah, I think that was basically it. So it's just finding the themes, and then he already kind of knew what he wanted the music to tell in each scene.
Well, I had a wonderful experience today listening to your score again, and I just noticed obviously that wonderful theme at the beginning and how you developed that theme throughout the film, particularly how it disintegrates at the end of the score.
Yeah, we already talked about that in the beginning, that this is kind of going to be an interesting journey with the main theme, because the family is together in the beginning and that very quickly goes away because the father gets sick and disappears. So then it was really about how do we build back up to something new. I mean, without spoiling the movie, but obviously we arrive in a slightly different place than where we started. And how do you tell that with the theme? And actually the ending was kind of tough to do at first. I did like a first draft that it just wasn't, I already could feel like it wasn't really hitting the right notes. But then I mean, just said like, don't try to play the scene too much, because I was still like, even though it was sort of the final scene, I was still sort of playing the action. And it was just like, just play the emotion, like just show me in the music how you feel about this. And then I just kind of let the music take over. It was like very great direction, I would say, because it just kind of set me free to do some kind of new version of the theme, and I think it became like one of Amin's favorite themes and cues in the movie, and certainly it's one of my favorites as well, because that's where the music really sets off in the end.
Yes, I can hear the emotions in your music without seeing any of the visuals. It's really effective.
Oh, very cool. Thank you.
How long did it take you to score 5,000 Blankets?
We kind of hit the ground running on that. I perhaps spent like a month on the composition, and then we had to record and mix pretty quickly. So I would say probably 2 months all in all for the whole thing, from the first themes to the end, around that time. So it was definitely not much time to sort of second guess myself, which is also can be a very good thing, because I'm sort of overly self-critical easily, and even in this movie, like with the last cue, I started sort of overthinking some notes, and I changed them, and Amin was like, no, the first one was really good, so go back to the first one. And I'm glad he said that, because I was already sort of getting lost in the woods. So it's sort of so important to sort of keep the big picture with melodies. That's actually just like a anecdote from my first feature film, The Home of Dark Butterflies. That was obviously also a very melodic score, and my mom happened to walk into the studio while I was working on that, and I had played her like the first theme, and actually get the same advice back then, like go back to the first one. that was better, and in both cases the advice was completely right. So it's sometimes easier for people outside to see, because you might be, as the composer, sort of too deep into the music. So
now, where was this score recorded, and what size of orchestra did you use for 5,000 Blankets?
Yeah, that's using the Budapest Art Orchestra. I think it was around 50 strings. It's a sizable string orchestra, like a real proper string orchestra. So we could really get that sort of very warm and nice emotional sound. Then we had woodwind players here in Finland that I recorded. They're the same players that I've already used on like Tale of a Forest and those nature films. So I know them well. So they came back for this. And there's guitar. The guitar player, Andrew Sinovich, is in Los Angeles. So he did it there. And then there's some vocals, Finnish vocalists. My partner Maiju, she's the other vocalist, and then there's a pop singer, Virpi Erama, who kind of sings in the end credits song, kind of does this choir thing. So yeah, I think that's mostly the musicians.
Now let's go back to the very beginning now. How did your interest in music originally start?
Well, in music in general, I'm from a family that has sort of always had music in it, because my parents met in a choir, so that always starts from there. And my mom has been a piano teacher, and also a performing pianist, but she's done her main career as a piano teacher in like the local music school. And she actually had a cello, because she always loved the sound of the cello, but only played that as sort of a small hobby. But then she kind of planted that seed in me when she asked, like, would I like to play the cello? And at the time, I had just learned off a TV series this kind of phrase, like, don't even think about it. And I thought I just wanted to use it because I was like 3 years old, so I couldn't understand what she was actually asking. So when she asked, do you want to play this cello? I was like, don't even think about it. So she actually shelved the cello. And then after a couple of years, I was like, I actually like to play the cello. So we had to get a new one. And then I was like 6 or 7 and started playing the cello. So that's kind of where the orchestral part comes from. Around that time, I also started sort of experimenting with making my own music on the computer. I had like a Commodore Amiga where I had a music program. I remember my dad just passing by in the hallway when I was trying the first thing I ever did. And he's very sort of always, that's probably where my sort of self-criticism comes from, because he always will say something negative first. So it's kind of very Finnish thing, like, he was just like, you should probably not make it so, you need to add some repetition because it's hard to listen to this because it doesn't make any sense. So I think that was my first music feedback ever. But I started doing my own music on the computer, mostly like electronic music, because I was really into like The Prodigy and Chemical Brothers and this kind of 90s British electronic bands. I didn't really do orchestral music at first at all. This cello playing was sort of a separate thing entirely. Then I think it was like Hans Zimmer's sort of mid-90s scores, where I started to like really thinking about, hey, I could use both of these in film music. This very sort of different thinking where other genres seem to have sort of very divided. You had the electronic music or you had some orchestral music, but that was when I started thinking like maybe I could use these both. And I really got into film music at that point. But then I kind of expanded into the orchestral stuff and really the more orchestral composers.
Now, when did you decide to have a go at making film music a career?
I didn't really think I could make it a career at the time, honestly. When I applied to Sibelius Academy, which is sort of the main music university in Finland, and I applied to the music technology department. They didn't have like a film scoring program, but I felt that was the closest because I needed the technology stuff, and then I could sort of customize it and do composition design. But I never said I'm gonna be a film composer. I always said it like I'm interested in film music. So I was just proclaiming myself as very interested in this subject, but I never thought I would actually make it until I actually started getting feature films, and it was like, oh, it seems like I'm actually doing this, but it just felt very unrealistic and distant at the time. So I don't think I ever decided it, but I was just really passionate about it, and so I went to study it, even though I probably, like, if I was being sort of very sort of calculative, I should have picked my other hobby, which was programming, and gone to like the sort of programming schools in Finland, which we of course had many at the time already. So that would have been the wise professional choice, but I just kind of followed my passion. It's such a cliche, but I guess it really was that thing at the time.
So I'm pleased you decided to go with the film music. I've done the stuff you're working is fantastic, in my opinion.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Sometimes when, especially at the start of my career, I often would look at my sort of programming friends and with envy, because they had sort of stable jobs and they didn't need to worry about income and stuff like this. But in hindsight, I feel like it was the right choice.
Your patience won out at the end.
Yes.
Now, how did you get that all-important first assignment?
Well, the first feature film happened basically because I went to do this. This was like one of the best advice I ever got, because I contacted this Finnish film composer Tuomas Kantelinen when I started my studies at Sibelius Academy, and he basically told me a couple of things, but one thing he said was really important, was that I go to the film school and offer to score their short films, because not only would I learn how to work with filmmakers and talk like a filmmaker and with filmmakers, but also I would have those contacts later on. I really didn't understand how profound that was until I moved to Los Angeles to study at USC, and I did some interning in LA and all stuff like that. But then I got an offer to do a feature film in Finland, The Home of Dark Butterflies, which was by one of the major production companies in Finland, and the director was up and coming director, and it was like, well, where did this come from? I had no idea. So, and then I found out that it was the couple of the sound people on the team who had been starting to talk to the director that, hey, we did some student films with this composer, and he apparently, they said I wrote well under dialogue, and because the movie had a lot of dialogue scenes where you needed music, they said probably should check out Panu. So that's how that happened. So it was definitely sort of a continuation of those student films, but they happened like 5 years earlier. So it takes time for these sort of relationships to move into sort of new phases in your career. So it was really important that was like one of the first things I did when I got to the music university to start scoring student films. That I didn't just wait until I was sort of ready, in quotes. You're probably never ready, really. So it was definitely the right time to get in them as soon as possible.
You have a wonderful orchestral sound, and it seems to go very well in documentaries, of which you've won 3 IFMCA awards. Tell us about your score for the first one, Tales of the Forest.
That was like the first time I did a nature film, so I didn't really have any idea what that would be like. So it was a producer that I knew from, I had done like a thriller film for their company. After a while, asked me to score Tale of Forest, because that was sort of his sort of pet project I was really into. And I had no idea if anybody was ever going to watch it, because it was typically, if you do like a major documentary like that in Finland, you're going to get like a couple thousand people watching it. And they were saying that they wanted to release it in theaters. So I was like, this is really interesting. I don't know. They probably won't get many people to view it. So I just thought, I'm just going to do really just do it for ourselves, just make something that I really love. And, nature is a really important subject for me. So I was like, I'm just going to do as good a job as I can, even though nobody's ever going to hear this. So that was kind of how I started off on that. It felt really hard at first because it didn't have a structure like you would find in a drama film, which I'd done mostly before, or in some horror films at that point. It was very open-ended, and I At first I was like, I don't know what to do. There's close-ups of birds sitting on twigs, and I don't know, how do you score this? And then I sort of started to realize through some trial and error that this was going to be more of like a project like you would do like an album, like where the music really has more freedom, because this was not one of those sort of very narrative nature documentaries. As we know, there are some of these that have very sort of thematic narratives, and this was more of kind of just observing the nature. And of course, there are some events that are happening, but you're kind of this observer that goes through these different moments. So I started scoring it sort of as like I was just writing an album of nature music. And that's really opened up some like creative ideas as well, because it was like, well, now I don't need to constantly be worrying about getting out of the way. I can sort of just let the music be music. I think that became tremendously freeing. And just, we didn't have a lot of money for a big orchestra. So I think I had like 10 string players and the same 4 woodwinds as I had on 5,000 blankets. I didn't even have any brass on Taylor first. So I think I had 14 players total. So I had to do sample brass on that. And also I think because I had so few players, I had to be sort of more inventive of how to use like the woodwinds, just get the most out of them. So I decided one of the cues to just write for woodwinds only. And just, I have to make this work somehow. And I had to figure out how to momentum for woodwinds. It presented some interesting puzzles, I think, as well.
2016, you won again with another tale, this time Tale of a Lake. Yes.
That's kind of been the thing every time we started a new tale is now we need to figure out something new. So we don't want to do exactly the same thing. And they're also not sort of thematically connected. I'll have some maybe similar moments, but we didn't want to sort of reuse same themes. We kind of want them to be in individual films. So, and of course in Tale of a Lake, the big thing was to have this female vocalist who ended up being Johanna Kurkela, who's this sort of fairly famous Finnish singer. And she obviously has this amazing sort of airy voice that really gave a sort of very new angle to whole music. And also the image quality had become much better, because in Tale of Forest they actually used some like 10-year-old footage from like DV cameras, because they had just captured some of these like amazing moments that they could not recreate with new and more professional equipment. It just felt older, the footage, but now we had sort of very professional looking footage all the time, and so we kind of had to push the music also to have bit more of a sort of produced quality, I suppose. So with that, well, we ended up having a bit bigger orchestra on that. So I had some real brass for the first time on the Tale of Movies. But yeah, obviously the vocalist was the big thing. But they actually had thought of having like a real actress talk as the voice of this water spirit in the story. But then they thought that would be kind of cheesy to have the water spirit actually talk. So then we talked about, well, maybe the vocalist could be the voice of the water spirit. So that's kind of what it became. So one of the sort of the characters of the movie is sort of present in the music and also kind of speaking through the music. So that was a really interesting angle on that.
In 2022, another tale became an IFMCA success, Tale of the Sleeping Giants.
That was, again, big upgrade again on the image, even though Tale of the Lake looked amazing. But this was like clearly like BBC level imagery. So sort of the question, like, what do we do with the music now? Because we kind of, that was like a big thing already having the vocalist. So now what do we do now? And then we happened to get the Tapiola Sinfonietta, which is one of these sort of, I would say, the best chamber orchestra in Finland, and they wanted to play on it, and that was a big thing. We now could actually have real orchestra instead of sort of trying to figure out some samples to cover for it. And also got this amazing studio percussionist, Mamba Assefa from Helsinki, who he just played some really cool percussive rhythms. So I could do like percussion only cues, which I hadn't done before, because I don't want to use like loops or whatever sort of samples to build those kind of cues. But if you have real percussionists, then it's really cool to do some sort of percussion only stuff. And then of course, I think the biggest thing is we had this vocal group called Tuuletar, which is this 4-person vocal group. They have very cool sort of folk music meets sort of modern electronic music or other kinds of influences that they do on their own albums, and also some like really cool a cappella works. I think one of them ended up on like a Game of Thrones trailer, so they've kind of also done some work from the scoring world. But yeah, they became the vocalists on that. So, and we also kind of did some very experimentative things with their voices. One of the sessions, probably the weirdest session I've ever done is because I asked the producer and director what are their favorite thoughts in this film, basically, like just a couple of lines of text that you think is really important to you. And I had the vocal group sort of read these sentences by holding a chord, which kind of sounds like you're doing like a religious ceremony or something, because you're holding a steady tone and then you're reading text, and it was like really weird and totally wrong for the movie. So everyone was just staring at me like, what are you doing? But I was like, no, just bear with me. I kind of have an idea. So I took those recordings and I created these like random textures out of that, because one of the big themes of the movie was sort of communication, because there's kind of this story with the whales in the beginning. They give out this message that travels through the animal kingdom, and then kind of we come back to the whales in the end of the movie. And I was like, how can I make something that sounds like communication without actually using words, because we don't want to get into the whole mess of having actual words in film scoring. That's usually a very bad idea, because you have to translate and you have to have subtitles and whatever, and it's very distracting. So I wanted to have it sound like text without being that. So when I did like this very sort of random synthesis of those recordings, it ended up being this sort of interesting texture of, I think I kind of stole that idea from Arrival, because I think you asked some kind of, I don't know how he did it that in the movie, but it kind of sounded like it was kind of speech. So I thought I had like, I'm going to try something like that. So, and that, I think that became like the producer director's like favorite cues in the movie. So it was a really fun experiment that kind of worked out. So it was more of this kind of experimenting stuff, but of course we still had the big orchestral cues as well. And there's like Prokofiev style cues and whatever. So it's kind of probably has the biggest range of genres in all the tale movies.
Concerning nature scoring, would you one day like to do the pinnacle scoring? A BBC nature documentary, if you had the chance, maybe directed by David Attenborough?
Yeah, I totally would love to do one of those. I think it's, if I got the opportunity, I would jump on it. But I don't really have the contacts, I guess. But yeah, totally.
Well, let's see what we could do thanks to this show. As you've scored documentaries and features, do you feel you have a different approach when you're scoring features compared to documentaries?
Yeah, for sure. I would say on features, you will have the structure is so much around the dialogue and the sort of flow of the scenes and the rhythm, the images. And of course, you can have that in nature films as well. If they have very sort of cinematic storytelling, then you might have similar flow. But in these kinds of nature films that I've done in Finland, those have been sort of very open-ended, and that leads to a very different kind of film scoring where you're kind of almost just writing songs without words, but still you're kind of creating music in a different, not in a void, but still it's much more open. And also I think it's much more sort of specific when you're working on narrative fiction or dramas or that kind of stuff, because you really have to think about the meanings in very specific ways. If I go up here, then what do people think that line that they just said or that they're going to say? What does that mean? So the interactions are happening all the time. So you kind of have to be mindful of all of that. So yeah, it definitely feels much more sort of strict structurally and in other ways as well when you're doing narrative fiction. Yeah.
In features, which genres do you enjoy working on?
I do always get a bit giddy when I get to do like adventure, this kind of big sort of soaring or swashbuckling orchestral music. I just get a big kick out of that. And I always, when I was sort of just making music for fun, I always ended up creating a sort of like really epic or at least very big build-ups in my music. That was actually one of the first conversations I had with Tuomas Kantelinen when I called him initially when I got into Sibelius Academy, and he asked me, what kind of music do you want to do? And I said, like, big emotions. And he thought for like half a second and said, get out of Finland fast. So it's true that Finnish movies have tended to be more on the subtle side or even quiet. Like there didn't used to be film music, frankly, before Tuomas came along in like the late 90s, and he started doing like orchestral scores in Finnish movies, but it was mostly like quiet movies. So yeah, Finland is probably not the best place to do. But I've kind of do surprisingly many adventure movies actually. So I kind of maybe started in a good time because those kind of came back in fashion. So that's definitely, like super FURBALL type movies where you have kind of this animation influence as well. It's just so much fun to do that kind of stuff. So that's kind of a separate thing from like doing the sort of drama music, which is more kind of, it's more serious in a way, but that's of course very fulfilling when you kind of create that sort of some of true emotion for people, and they really, you can see that really affects people. Then obviously that's amazing, but those are more challenging is probably not the right word, because those are definitely, it's not easy to do adventure music for sure. I get into kind of this groove, I think, with the adventure stuff where it's just like, it just feels fun. It's still work, but it's really fun. That's actually interesting thing about the sort of genres. I don't think there's been sort of focused education in my past of different kinds of film genres. It's kind of just is this one big hole that you kind of navigate, but it's kind of interesting because they are so different. Even just film in general, it's kind of this grammar on its own that you kind of just have to adopt. It's really not easy to sort of teach drama in a film. Like, I don't mean just drama films, but just like the how the whole thing works. And I remember like when I was doing those short films in film school, it was so weird to me. Like, how can you tell where music is supposed to start and stop? But now it kind of feels very natural. So the whole genre thing is really interesting. And I wonder if maybe it could be taught in a more methodical way, but that didn't happen in my time. So you kind of just pick up on the films that you like. You kind of, your intuition goes from there.
To date, what has been your favourite directorial collaboration experiences?
I definitely, I'll say immediately that Metallica on 5,000 Blankets was an amazing collaboration because he's so knowledgeable about film music and he's very musical, but it doesn't lead to sort of limiting the composer in any way, which is amazing because that I would imagine if I was sort of directing a movie, I would have a lot of very specific suggestions for the composer very easily. But I mean, just really gives a lot of room, and it's just like a perfect balance, and just like how much passion he had for the film music, and also pushing for us to have the orchestra and all that stuff. It was just one of a kind collaboration. So for sure, that's been one of my favorite ones. And also like with the nature films with producer and director Marco Röör, those been like really. I've gotten a lot of sort of freedom to score those in a way that sort of looks like myself, and it's been a very good relationship. I have to like specifically also from Finnish directors, I should mention AJ Annila. He's another like very musical director who clearly understands music. I was just watching this TV series today that I'm about to score for him, and Temp Track was amazing because it was all my music. I sent them like my initial demos with layers so they could just pick whatever to use, and it was actually like, wow, I don't know what to do anymore. This is ready. Like it's just very musically done, the whole edit and the temp, and of course I think the editor also has a role in that, so I'm sure it's both of them, but it's just again like very good collaboration where sort of music has a clearly defined place and reason to exist. Because I've heard actually like they used to teach in like the Finnish film schools that if you use film music when there's a problem in the film, then you have to use film music, but if the film is fine then you don't need music. This is literally what they've been sort of there was like a teacher that used to teach film like that. So I'm so fortunate when there are directors who love music and they really know what to do with that. So these kinds of collaborations are the best.
Let's now talk generally about your music. Who do you think are your musical influences of your musical style?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I feel like I've come a long way from the time that I started. Whenever I need to call upon a sort of the electronic style, then those influences are still there from the Prodigy and Chemical Brothers, even like Nine Inch Nails, and of course Trent Reznor is doing film scoring these days, so that kind of sound is getting in this style as well. But then I started off with the Hans Zimmer stuff in the mid-90s. Then I got really quickly into the more orchestral composers like John Williams. And of course, at USC, we're really studying a lot of Jerry Goldsmith's music as well. And Goldsmith, of course, was actually a very early user of sort of electronics and other experimental techniques with the orchestra. So I think Goldsmith is definitely a big influence because of that. And then there's so many, like I would say, like Michael Kamen or Vasil Polidorus or Morricone, obviously, and I feel like I'll be writing a score and then I'm suddenly like, oh, that was like a total Alan Silvestri moment, and these just like come up from the subconscious somehow, and it's this big mix of all the things I've heard before, but certainly it feels like I'm often drawn into sort of films that I would see in my like teenage years. That's always kind of your formative years. I think for any kind of music, people will really always carry that music with them, and then kind of even just as a listener, I'm always interested in kind of new techniques as well. But I don't think anything sort of completely replaces what came in before. It sort of just becomes slightly more refined in how I like the Tale of the Sleeping Giants example, where I was sort of using these more experimental techniques with the vocals, but I still have the sort of very traditional, clear like John Williams moments in that score as well. So it's this big mix, I guess.
Which of your fellow composers working at present do you most admire?
Well, I wouldn't say fellow because John Paul is older and obviously very accomplished. But I mean, I'm a huge John Paul fan. I would say always interested in whatever he comes up with because it's just obviously like the How to Train Your Dragon scores and have been absolutely genius stuff, and then to enjoy everything he does, and I think he just does everything so well that I've often joked that my favorite composers are John and John, and I let people figure it out from there. so it's like that's totally that would be easy answer for me with him, I think. Yeah.
Do you feel that film music should be functional in context, but also good music to stand out on its own?
Well, I mean, that's kind of, it kind of depends on, I feel like the answer is actually that usually good film music will work on its own because it will be good music as well. I often think about the fact that you can sort of fulfill the function of film music in a scene with almost sort of very empty music. You can give the feeling of something without actually saying much. And I think that's really not good for the film either. And it's obviously not going to be very interesting as a separate piece of music. But I feel like the film or TV series or whatever, it deserves a unique signature. And kind of what happens when you do music that is sort of worthwhile and has a reason for existing beyond just, say, doing what kind of needs to be done, but it also has another reason to exist. And I think those actually kind of go together. So yes, I would actually say that good film music will be music that you can listen to it on your own. Of course, then personal preferences will dictate whether that kind of genre is for you. But I think if the music just isn't very interesting within that genre, it's usually probably not going to be very good film music either. I mean, it may do the basics, but it won't sort of be part of elevating the project to sort of a very special status, which I think we should always strive for. So yeah, I think those go together in a way.
What is your opinion of the state today and the future of film and TV music?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Big thing with me is, of course, I love melody. So I've been kind of sad how it's kind of been out of fashion for a couple of decades now. But I feel like maybe it's coming back a little because you hear it in superhero movies, like big budget movies. And, it's not just drones all over the place or just some very drone-ish stuff. So it's really hard to estimate where things are going. And then, of course, the whole thing with neural nets and AI, and that's going to be just so disruptive in many ways, and probably not all of it bad, but also not all of it good. So it's going to be very hard to estimate where things are going next. But do you think that it feels like there's a lot of, especially the fact that sort of TV scoring has sort of become this very, we have very big scores like the Lord of the Rings stuff, and now TV used to be sort of not kind of on the same level as film, but it feels like it's come on its own really through the streaming services, I suppose, because they've really upped the game so much. So I think there are a lot of positives, but it's really hard to say what the direction is. And I just hope that it sort of stays important and people are willing to sort of have sort of composers actually write some music instead of taking shortcuts that may save some money. But at the moment, I'm sort of optimistic that things are going in a good direction.
Now, away from film and television, what other sorts of music do you enjoy at the present?
Still have the electronic side of me that I occasionally I'll listen to, like some drum and bass music. So it'll be completely different from what I do. And I've never been like a big listener on contemporary sort of concert music, but there are sometimes some very interesting, like the Finnish composer YACHT does very interesting just very interesting sounds, and I just find when it's really well made, it's kind of interesting. But I've never really, because I'm a bit too young to have ever gotten into the Beatles, but I just saw the Get Back documentary finally, and my uncle is like a huge Beatles fan, and so I was like, I'll listen through all their albums from the beginning and see how to get a better understanding. And that's kind of one of those bands that you cannot understand from a few sort of random hits that they have. It's such an interesting arc as artists that they had, from that very sort of straightforward music to sort of very experimentation filled stuff. So it's actually been some recent stuff that I've been listening. It's just through all the Beatles stuff.
I think you've already mentioned some already, but after your great score for 5,000 Blankets, what projects are you allowed to tell us you're working on at this moment?
Well, actually, I think neither one of them, because they haven't sort of yet been public about my... So yeah, unfortunately, I can't really name any names, but I am working on a TV series that is kind of multinational, but it's basically Finland, Sweden, France, I think, are the main locations for that. And then there's an American movie that's hopefully moving forward. I think they're still securing the final round of funding, but basically those are sort of on the plate. So I hope to be able to share more from them very soon. And I just had the sequel to Finders of the Lost Yacht, the sequel to that, come out in the theaters in Finland. So we're releasing that album on Movie Square Media in the next week or so, I think. Yeah.
Yes, I'm pleased you're doing some more work. Your music fully deserves a wider audience because it's absolutely superb in my opinion. How do you see your career progressing in the future?
Well, I mean that's always hard because I feel like it's never gone the way I imagined. That's like the only thing I can really say for sure, that always took a different, surprising direction. Like with the nature films, I had no idea I would ever be scoring like those things, and then they end up sort of being very important in my career and for me personally. So it's really hard. What I'm sort of trying to do consciously is to try to get more sort of international films. And I've been doing so many Finnish films. I feel like it's time for something different at this point, because it's turned 40, so it's kind of this kind of moment of reflection of like what should I do next. And so I've been really sort of working towards. Been trying to spend more time in Los Angeles, and I have a work visa active there already, so I can sort of just jump into local projects easily. And that's sort of, I think, the next phase of my career, hopefully, is to do more stuff in LA and maybe in London as well.
And if you want to see 5,000 Blankets, it's available to stream and on DVD from March 2023. And if you want to listen to more of Panu's magnificent score for 5,000 Blankets, it's available to stream or buy on all digital platforms. Panu Aaltio, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us today on Talking Soundtracks.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
I do hope you have enjoyed my interview with composer Panu Aaltio. I must mention here that the Talking Soundtracks theme was composed by David Cosina. I leave you with music by Panu, which was released in February 2023. It comes from his score to Pertsa and Kilo, Rangers of the Lost Ring, and the cue is entitled Mystery Never Ends. My thanks again to Panu Aaltio for joining us today on Talking Soundtracks on the Cinematic Sound Radio podcast, and until we meet again, from me, Jason Drury, is take care and happy listening.
Thank you for tuning in to the Cinematic Sound Radio Network. I want to thank Tim Burton for providing his voice for all the bumpers and stingers you hear throughout the program, and David Cosina for providing Cinematic Sound Radio's theme music. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at cinematicsound@yahoo.com. You can find us on social media at CinSound Radio on Twitter and Cinematic Sound on Facebook. And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment right now to rate the show and write a brief review. Reviews help introduce potential listeners to the show. And while you're at it, head over to TeePublic to get a Cinematic Sound Radio t-shirt. And don't forget to check out Cinematic Sound Radio at cinematicsound.net.